Chapter 71. A transfer of 3.2 million yuan. You're listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 71. A transfer of 3.2 million yuan. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Didn't the two of them just receive their weapons? How are they already so strong? They've already entered the competent stage. They are very familiar with the techniques of their weapons. That's right. They must already be in the competent stage. Forget about Gao Hongji. He must have practiced before and had hired a private tutor to mentor him in private. However, I heard that Chu Yunfan's family background is rather ordinary. How does he know the earth-splitting saber technique so well? Without realizing it, many people started discussing among themselves. I've heard of this firestorm spear technique. Although it's not a particularly high-level spear technique, it's a high-level one for us. A few hundred years ago, a peerless expert created this spear technique and used it to sweep away all his enemies. Yeah, I've seen someone use the firestorm spear technique in tournament arenas before. Once it's used, it's extremely difficult to block. If the opponent's rhythm is messed up by Gao Hongji, it'll be all over. One spear after another will rain down like a storm until the opponent is defeated. This is the rarest thing. The firestorm spear technique is so powerful, but Chu Yunfan isn't the slightest bit flustered. He's guarding his body tightly using the earth-splitting saber technique, one strike after another. The continuous saber momentum blocks the firestorm spear technique. The momentum of the firestorm spear technique can't be raised and its power is greatly reduced. The two of them are indeed worthy of being the elites of our class. They're so powerful. The dazzling exchange of blows between the two of them even attracted the attention of the other elites in the class who had already entered the Chi Si stage. Although there were high and low levels of cultivation among the people now, in general, they were still on the same level. At this time, the strength of the martial skills might very well determine the outcome of the battle between the two parties. Whether it was Chu Yunfan or Gao Hongji, although they had known each other for a long time, in reality, there were very few opportunities to really fight. Or it could be said that there was no chance to fight at all. Previously, Chu Yunfan's and Gao Hongji's strengths were too far apart. Chu Yunfan also knew his own strength and would not humiliate himself. But now, they were both on equal footing. Such a fight was rare. In particular, the training of both sides on weapons had just begun. They both treated each other as sparring partners and used all kinds of methods at once. Therefore, the entire scene was exceptionally exciting and very attractive. However, the people present were not ordinary people. They naturally understood that no matter how good the fight was, it was actually very dangerous. Using real weapons could bring about accidents really easily. If one could not control it, it could cause a tragedy. Fortunately, technology was very advanced in this day and age. Unless one died on the spot, they could be saved from even the brink of death. The two made over 100 strikes each. Each of these strikes consumed a lot of energy, and the gap between the two sides was obvious. Gao Hongji was plump, but his body was robust. However, at this moment, his entire body was drenched as if he had just been scooped out of a lake. However, Chu Yunfan's breathing was still steady, and had barely broken a sweat. At this point, everyone understood that Chu Yunfan was holding back. Otherwise, it would not have been so easy. However, even so, they had to admit that this battle was very exciting. Finally, there was a turning point in this battle. After Gao Hongji's stamina rapidly decreased, the speed of his spear attack slowed down and revealed an opening. Chu Yunfan slashed aside Gao Hongji's long spear with his blade and took a quick step forward. In an instant, he arrived in front of Gao Hongji. The blade stopped 3 inches in front of Gao Hongji. The piercingly sharp energy from the saber seemed to hurt Gao Hongji's face. Being able to release and retract his energy so easily made everyone's evaluation of Chu Yunfan's strength increase by another level. Ha ha ha, I fought to my heart's content. Gao Hongji guffawed, feeling extremely happy. Although I know you're letting me off easy, it doesn't matter. I'm happy. I'm having a great time. I could go all out. You've given me answers to many of my questions. This is 10 times more effective than practicing alone. I'll look for you often in the future. Ha ha ha. Gao Hongji was not a fool. He could naturally see that Chu Yunfan was going easy on him. However, what did it matter to him? Not to mention, he felt that Chu Yunfan was looking down on him and was not using his full strength. He was not full of himself and could not tell which one of them was better. Ha, come on. That is if you are not afraid of being tortured to tears. Chu Yunfan also said nonchalantly. When the crowd saw that there was nothing left to watch, they dispersed one after another. They went off to practice. The selection of the top 20 was just around the corner. At that time, the school would probably not pit them against virtual martial artists, but would have them fight each other until the final victor emerged. At that time, it would be a real fight. Moreover, the battle with the monster would be coming soon. They had to seize whatever time they had to cultivate. Fortunately, those who were able to enter the martial arts stream focus classes were basically the best. Their cultivation speed was also very fast. If it was the student of a regular class, it was likely that they would not be able to keep up with this kind of learning progress. This was also the reason why the school separated the students into regular classes and focus classes. It was to nurture these talented students, and at the same time, take care of those students with average talent. Otherwise, if they were taught together, it would seem fair, but in fact, it was a waste of resources for both sides. On this day, Chu Yunfan, who had just returned home after receiving his weapon, received a transfer message from the bank. 3.2 million had been transferred into his account. Chu Yunfan knew that Lu Qingxian must have sold the Meridian's cleansing pill. This must be the money from the sale. Not long after the transfer of the money, someone from the bank called and asked Chu Yunfan if he wanted to upgrade his user level. If he did that, he might have to spend a little more every month, but he would be able to enjoy more services. Chu Yunfan rejected the offer without even thinking. Those services might be great, but they were meaningless to him at the moment. His money would be spent very soon and it was impossible for him to save it. However, he could not help but sigh. The bank's sense of smell and reaction was so fast that when there was no money, they would not even bother with you. However, once you started to have money, all kinds of services would come knocking on your door. After hanging up the bank's call, Lu Qingxuan's call came in. She informed Chu Yunfan that other than paying for the appropriate taxes, she did not touch a single cent from the sale of the perfect quality Meridian's cleansing pill, she did not even take the 5% stipulated in the contract. Although it looked like she had suffered a loss, in reality, she was doing no such thing. With this Meridian's cleansing pill, she had opened up a path that would have otherwise taken a very long time to establish. Chapter 72. Half a month of progress. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 72. Half a month of progress. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. A big medicine distributor in Jinghua was so impressed by the Meridian's cleansing pill and had agreed to establish a cooperative relationship with Lu Qingxian. It was because the grandson of this big distributor had just been born and had been looking for a Meridian's cleansing pill everywhere. With his power, it was easy to find a Meridian's cleansing pill, but it was not easy to find a perfect quality one. Other than those official alchemists who could occasionally refine one, only an alchemy expert would have a certain degree of confidence in refining such a high-quality pill. He took this Meridian's cleansing pill as a huge favor to him. Lu Qingxian did not hide any of this. She knew that if she wanted to work together with Chu Yunfan for a long time, this kind of concealment would only destroy their relationship. However, Chu Yunfan merely smiled and did not say much. He only needed the money. As for what she did with the Meridian's cleansing pill, that was up to Lu Qingxuan's own abilities. Now that the money was finally in his account, he could finally buy the shadowless saber. He should be able to get it before the trial. "Brother, you're home early today." Chu Yunfan had just opened the door when he saw Chu Qingxian coming out from her room in her wheelchair. Her face was filled with a bright smile. "I decided to practice a little less today and come home early." Chu Yunfan nodded. "Brother, my number of subscribers has officially exceeded the 10,000 mark today." Chu Qingxian said excitedly. Her originally mature and sensible little face was now brimming with a youthful smile. It was as if she was saying, "Quickly praise me. Praise me. That's amazing." Chu Yunfan said with an exaggerated expression. Chu Qingxian immediately revealed a look of disdain and said, "Brother, you aren't being sincere at all. Your expression is so exaggerated. I can only give you 5 points for this fake expression. Sigh, it seems that my acting skills have deteriorated recently. I thought I would get at least 50 points. Chu Yunfan said mischievously. After the two siblings bantered for a while, Chu Yunfan returned to his room. His sister's streaming career was thriving, so Chu Yunfan was naturally happy for her. It was not because she was slowly earning more and more money. It was just that after having gotten a career to rely on, the smile on her sister's face had also become wider and wider. It was no longer a forced smile, but a smile that came from the heart. Sooner or later, I will earn enough money to cure my sister's illness. Chu Yunfan thought to himself. After putting down his school bag, he tummed on his computer and immediately went to the weapons website. He placed an order for the shadowless. He had just received 3.2 million and it immediately flowed back out like running water. He had spent 3 million. Fortunately, he still had 200,000 to buy vitality elixirs to replenish his consumption when practicing. The ginseng and Ganoderma he usually ate, although the medicinal effects were there, they could not keep up with his current astonishing consumption rate. Although the power of the mighty Eternal Emperor method was astonishing, at the same time, the consumption was even greater. Everything would be fine. Chu Yunfan secretly swore that he would let his parents and sister lead a good life, cure his sister's illness, send her to the best school, and make up for everything that she had lost in the past. In the past, this would have been impossible. But now, it was possible. Thinking of this, Chu Yunfan sat cross-legged on his meditation mat and began to meditate. He had just broken through to the second level of the Qi-Si stage and needed time to consolidate. The time that he could use for cultivation was short and he did not want to waste even a minute, or even a second, of it. In the training room of number 13 high school, there were students everywhere either meditating or practicing martial arts. It could be said that it was bustling with activity. At this moment, two figures were continuously crossing each other in the middle of the ring. The weapons in their hands were also continuously crossing each other, emitting a series of clanging sounds. One could even vaguely see sparks flying in all directions from the clash between their sharp weapons. One of these two figures was fat while the other was thin. They looked to be at extreme odds with each other, but they were equally agile and vigorous. The martial skills that both sides displayed, one with a long spear and the other with a saber, were extremely smooth. They both switched between moves effortlessly. They had clearly stepped into the impeccable stage of martial skills. But if these two people were not Chu Yunfan and Gao Hongji, then who were they? Gao Hongji's firestorm spear technique was extremely sharp. With a casual thrust of his spear, he was able to create 3 spear illusions in the air, making it impossible for people to distinguish between the illusory images and the actual one. It had to be said that the current Gao Hongji was indeed very powerful. In the blink of an eye, another half a month had passed. Compared to half a month ago, Gao Hongji seemed to have undergone a complete transformation. Just half a month ago, Gao Hongji was already at the peak of the first level of the Qi-Si stage. He had now finally stepped into the second level. And his firestorm spear technique had finally stepped from the competent stage to the impeccable stage. And all of this had something to do with Chu Yunfan. During this half a month, he would practice with Chu Yunfan every day. And Chu Yunfan had controlled his strength perfectly every time. It was just enough to suppress Gao Hongji and let him use his full strength, but he would not be crushed by it. Therefore, his improvement was also extremely fast. Of course, Chu Yunfan's improvement was not slow at all. In the past half a month, not only had he completely consolidated his cultivation of the second level of the Qi Si stage, but he had also successfully reached the peak of the second level. He was only one step away from the third level of the Qi Si stage. And his earth-splitting saber technique had also smoothly approached the impeccable stage and was also one step away from perfection. It seemed that his progress was about the same as Gao Hongji's, but no one knew that Chu Yunfan was also practicing the Roaring Wind saber technique at the same time. His Roaring Wind saber technique had also reached the impeccable stage and was also one step away from perfection. He had grasped the essence of both techniques. If Chu Yunfan attacked with all his strength, it would not be a problem for him to suppress, or even defeat, several Gao Hongzis who were almost in the same realm as him. Of course, in this half a month, these two people were definitely not the only ones who had improved. Originally, only a portion of the people in Class 2 had entered the Qi Si stage, or even less than 1/3 of them. But now, it had been a month since the students were divided into their classes, and most of them had already entered the Qi Si stage. Although a small portion of them had not yet entered, it was only a matter of time. In the next few months until the college entrance examination, their strength would greatly improve. Even an ordinary martial arts university required one to have a cultivation level above the fourth level of the Qi Si stage, and they were still far from it. As Chu Yunfan was improving, Tang Xiyu had also stepped into the third level of the Qi Si stage and was not far from the fourth level. By now, she was already recognized as the second best in the class. And the first was naturally the steady Ouyang. A teacher had once unintentionally mentioned that Ouyang might have already stepped into the fifth level of the Qi Si stage, or even higher, and was still far ahead of the other students. After another round of intense battle, Chu Yunfan and Gao Hongji stopped. It was not just them, all the other students stopped because their homeroom teacher, Qin Wu, had arrived. And Qin Wu also brought a piece of news: the actual battle with the monsters was finally about to begin. 3 days later, on the battlefield between the human army and the monsters at the edge of Jinghai City. Chapter 73. Preparation before actual combat. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 73. Preparation before actual combat. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The news that Qin Wu brought made the students in the class either excited or worried. After all, they would not be fighting against humans this time, but against monsters. There was no such thing as the severity of a monster's attack. Once they started fighting, it would be life and death. And this was what they lacked. If it was hundreds of years ago, the environment would have been far worse than now. At that time, all the human powerhouses who could cultivate till the Qi Si stage would have been through hundreds of battles. It was impossible for them to train to this level just by studying in school. In 3 days, I will take you to the battlefield and help the border guards of Jinghai City to kill monsters. Qin Wu reported and took out a piece of paper and handed it to everyone. This is a death waiver. If something happens to you on the battlefield and you die, our school will not be responsible for it. You can choose to go or not. But if you go, you have to sign it. You may die. Take this death waiver home and have your guardian sign it. After signing it, it will be considered effective. The battlefield was ever changing. Any situation was possible. Even the school could not guarantee that there would be no casualties. If everyone came to find trouble with the school would have to shut down. This was because it was not forced. One could choose not to go and choose to be a commoner. However, if one went, they would have to bear the consequences. Chu Yunfan took the death waiver and looked at it. It was probably something like a disclaimer. However, he had already decided to participate in the actual combat. Every actual combat would allow one's strength to grow rapidly. If he missed this opportunity, he would only fall behind the others. The gap between the strength of the focus classes that participated in the actual combat and the ordinary classes that did not would also continuously widen. There were only 3 days left. He had to make good use of his time and cultivate the earth-splitting saber technique to perfection before stepping into the battlefield. There were only 3 days left. It seemed like an impossible mission. But for Chu Yunfan, it was not impossible. Chu Yunfan brought this death waiver back home. Although his parents were worried, they still signed their names. They had participated in actual combat in the past and knew the dangers of actual combat. However, that was something that happened during their university days. And now, their son was so young, yet he wanted to participate in actual combat. This caused them to be somewhat worried. However, his parents also knew that their son was in an important class, and there was no comparing him and the ordinary class they were in before. Those who graduated from the important class all had hopes of entering a focus university or even entering the Federation's 10 focus universities. Their standards were definitely stricter than those of ordinary people. Son, I don't have much to say. It's just that on the battlefield, don't stray too far from your teachers, and don't stray too far from your classmates. If something goes wrong, run quickly and run to a place where there are soldiers. Generally speaking, this kind of actual combat army will not be too far away from you. Remember to keep your eyes and ears open. Chu Wenqing earnestly advised. Understand. Don't worry. Chu Yunfan nodded and said. Don't be brave and fierce. Don't fight for the limelight. That kind of person tends to die the fastest on the battlefield. Your father and I don't beg you to stand out. We'd rather you come back alive. Yang Yayun reminded him again. Okay. After dinner, Chu Yunfan went out and entered the training room in the neighborhood to practice the earth-splitting saber technique. In modem society, everyone cultivated. It was the great era of great cultivation, and training rooms had become a necessary facility in every neighborhood. Moreover, it was open to the residents of the neighborhood for free. The better the neighborhood, the better the facilities in the training room. Although it was already night, there were still many figures practicing in the training room. They were either meditating or practicing martial skills. They were all adults, and their strength was obviously much stronger than students who were still in school. They were all residents of the small district, and many of them knew of Chu Yunfan. Moreover, because there were more adults than children in the training room in the small district, Chu Yunfan immediately attracted the attention of many people. That's the Chu family's kid, Chu Yunfan, right? I couldn't tell. Previously, I always said that he had not much talent and that he would not even pass the exam for an ordinary martial arts class. Who would have thought that he would amaze everyone in the class allocation exam and enter a focus class? Indeed. We all misjudged him. It's not that his talent isn't good, but that he hid it very well. Only now had he amazed everyone in the class allocation test. Sigh, if he gets into an important class, then there's hope for him to get into a focus university in the future. It would be great if that kid from our family could be as good as him. Who says so? My daughter will also be in her 3rd year of high school next year and will also be taking the class allocation test. If she can't get into the martial arts stream, then she can only choose to be like us and go to work obediently. Although no one in modern society starves to death, it's still not comparable to those powerful martial artists who glorify their ancestors. As Chu Yunfan walked in, he became the main topic of discussion. However, he did not take it to heart. Instead, he found a space, pulled out his saber, and began to practice. SHNNG. 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 Chu Yunfan's saber slashed through the air, emitting whistling sounds. He displayed his earth-splitting saber technique. This is the earth-splitting saber technique, right? He is already at the impeccable stage. I remember that they should have just started learning weapons and martial skills not too long ago. Could it be that this kid is really a genius? Many people looked at Chu Yunfan. They were all veterans, so they could naturally assess Chu Yunfan's level. They could not help but be shocked. The future of the Chu family child is limitless. If Chu Yunfan rises up, I'm afraid the Chu family will have to move away from here. They will definitely move to a wealthier district. Everyone was discussing animatedly. Meanwhile, Chu Yunfan was wholeheartedly displaying the earth-splitting saber technique. Every move appeared in his mind, and the scripture of the earth-splitting saber technique also appeared in his mind. Every single word appeared before him as if there was a supercomputer analyzing these techniques. In his mind, the Godhead was also continuously emitting light. Light flowed through his entire body, causing him to enter a meditative state as he practiced his techniques. In the past half a month, he had already cultivated the earth-splitting saber technique to the impeccable stage. Now, he was going to push himself to the perfection stage in one go, allowing his strength to advance one step further. Chapter 74. Breakthrough, Earth-Splitting Saber Technique. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 74. Breakthrough, Earth-Splitting Saber Technique. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. One strike after another. Chu Yunfan's was not very fast, but the momentum of his saber was continuous and his strikes relentless. Although each strike was different, there were no gaps in between them. One saber technique after another, as if there was no end. Slowly, the neighbors who were watching Chu Yunfan's practice dispersed. Although Chu Yunfan's momentum was extraordinary, watching it continuously was kind of boring. But soon, Chu Yunfan once again attracted their attention, because Chu Yunfan had performed the earth-splitting saber technique more than 20 times. They all more or less knew that the earth-splitting saber technique walked the path of great power and heaviness. In other words, it was very physically exhausting. Usually, a martial artist who had just entered the Chi-Si stage would be very tired after performing it 3 to 5 times in a row, and would be gasping for breath. Even an experienced martial artist in the Chi-Si stage would stop after performing it 10 times and rest for a while before saying a word. However, Chu Yunfan had casually performed the earth-splitting saber technique 20 times, and he was only gasping for breath ever so slightly. Clearly, he was far from reaching his limit. This enduring physical strength was very shocking. The unique feature of the earth-splitting saber technique was that one saber strike after another contained the mighty power of the earth. Other than its powerful and heavy force, the power of each strike stacked up. After performing it 20 times in a row, the power of the earth-splitting saber technique was already very shocking. With each strike, there was the sound of air being cut. It sounded very shocking, as if each strike could break a mountain. Chu Yunfan was unstoppable. Anyone who tried to block this force head-on would be like a praying mantis trying to stop a chariot. His earth-splitting saber technique gave people such a terrifying feeling. What power! To be honest, I never thought that an ordinary saber technique like the earth-splitting saber technique could have such power. If I had also just stepped into the Chi-Si stage, I might not have been able to block his saber technique at this moment and would have been defeated. That's right. The power in the strikes of earth-splitting saber technique accumulates one after another. And in the end, like a flash flood, it will pour out collectively. That is the most terrifying thing. However, generally speaking, in a normal battle, who would watch him perform the earth-splitting saber technique 20 times in a row and be unmoved? That, although that's the case, among his peers, he can be considered outstanding. Mr. Chu has finally made it. Perhaps his daughter's illness can be cured. Everyone was discussing animatedly. Chu Yunfan did not hear it. Or rather, he heard it. It was automatically filtered out. He felt as if he had fallen into a mysterious state. He only felt that a breakthrough was right in front of him. In front of him was the perfect stage of the earth-splitting saber technique. He continued to perform the earth-splitting saber technique tirelessly. Every time he felt tired, the godhead in his mind emitted a clear current, and the fatigue on his body would be instantly alleviated. Even a saber that weighed 40 pounds could be brandished vigorously. Time passed again and again. He did not know how much time had passed. Chu Yunfan only felt that the power of his strikes had been greatly enhanced. One strike after another, each one seemed to be splitting open an obstacle. He did not know how much time passed. Finally, the saber ruthlessly split everything in front of him apart. He suddenly felt as if he had suddenly become enlightened. It was as if he had walked through a long tunnel and saw the light again. "I've finally stepped into the perfection stage." As soon as Chu Yunfan's voice came out, the blade aura was immediately stopped. The blade aura could be retracted and released freely. This was the true realm of perfection. It could become light or heavy effortlessly. After reaching the perfection realm, he performed the earth-splitting saber technique once more. Its power was twice as strong as before. If he used his full strength, Gao Hongji, who was in the same stage as him, would not even be able to withstand 5 moves from him and would be defeated immediately. At this time, Chu Yunfan looked at the time. It was already midnight. Unknowingly, he had practiced for 6 hours in one go. At this time, there was no one left in the training room. Only he was still practicing. However, generally speaking, the training room in this residential area was open 24 hours a day. He was also secretly surprised. The mighty Eternal Emperor method that he practiced was much longer than ordinary cultivation techniques. His physical strength was several times that of an ordinary second-level Qi C stage. However, no matter how great his physical strength was, it was impossible for him to practice the saber technique for 6 hours in one go. The saber technique itself was quite heavy. In addition, the earth-splitting saber technique was very powerful and heavy. At this time, his hand should have been broken. He thought about it for a moment. It seemed to be because of the godhead in his mind. Whenever he was about to give up, a clear current would flow through his entire body to eliminate fatigue and maintain his consciousness. It had put him in a mysterious state. These 6 hours of epiphany allowed his earth-splitting saber technique to go from the impeccable stage to the perfection stage. Of course, it was not just these 6 hours that allowed him to reach perfection. It was also due to the accumulated experience from half a month ago. Chu Yunfan also could not understand the mystery behind it. However, from the looks of it, it should not be a bad thing. After tidying up a little, Chu Yunfan returned home. At this time, his family had already fallen asleep. Chu Yunfan took a shower but did not fall asleep immediately. Instead, he went online and began to look up some medical information. It was about the treatment of his sister's illness. 100 years ago, there would be no way to treat this genetic disease. Now, although there was a way to treat it, the price was still something that ordinary families could not afford. Their family could not afford it before, but now, it was possible for Chu Yunfan to do it. 1 Meridian's cleansing pill was sold for 3.2 million yuan. If he refined a few more, his sister's illness could be cured. Now that he had an alchemy trainee license, he could sell the pills he refined. Everything was ready. He had already planned to earn money to treat his sister's illness after he returned from combat training. At the moment, he was just checking the approximate price. These materials were not considered a secret on the internet. They were even promotional materials for some hospitals. Chu Yunfan took a look and realized that there were 2 types of surgeries. The cost of a normal surgery was about 10 million yuan. It was enough to make the patient stand up and walk and run like an ordinary person. However, that was all. This type of patient usually had their nerves and muscles atrophied for a long time, so they could not cultivate. There was another new type of treatment method that required 50 million yuan. The effect was even better. One could be restored to their original state. Not only could it restore one to the level of a normal person, but the person could also cultivate like a normal person. Naturally, Chu Yunfan did not hesitate to choose the second type of treatment method. He clenched his fists. After a period of time, his sister would be able to run and jump again. Just like an ordinary person, she would not have to endure the torment of being in a wheelchair. Everything was not far away. Chapter 75. Foam Daying Again. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 75. Foam Daying Again. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. 3 days, like a white horse galloping by, passed in the blink of an eye. Outside number 13 high school, it was very lively. These students were armed with weapons. Without even looking, it was obvious that these were students from the martial arts stream's focus classes. This had almost become a symbol. The other students looked at them with some reverence, which represented some sort of identity and strength. Among these people, there was a young man who looked about 16 or 17 years old. He wore a black martial arts uniform looking clean and neat. There was a battle saber on his back. However, this battle saber was sealed in its scabbard, making it impossible for people to see its true appearance. However, there were still sharp-eyed students who recognized it at once. The symbol on the scabbard was not hidden. Is that the shadowless saber? I've only read about it in magazines. I didn't expect that there were people in our school who could afford it. Some students recognized it when they saw the symbol and could not help but exclaim. It really is the shadowless saber. Per saber costs 3 million. Since its conception, it has been the favorite of countless monster hunters. It has also caused countless people to go bankrupt. Although our school is not a noble school, there are still quite a number of rich people. However, this senior looks very unfamiliar. He's not one of those rich seniors that I know. It's normal that you low-ranking students do not know him. This is Chu Yunfan. He has just started making a name for himself in the past 2 months. However, he's very strong. A month ago, he had already stepped into the Chi C stage during the class allocation assessment. Now, he's an elite student of the Focus Class 2 of the martial arts stream. Some of the students had sharp eyes and recognized Chu Yunfan. After all, during this period of time, Chu Yunfan had started to become famous. So it's him. I've heard of him. However, it's rumored that he's a commoner student. How could he afford the shadowless saber? Even an ordinary rich man could not afford it. How many monster hunters and explorers have gone bankrupt just to get a shadowless blade? Many students nodded one after another, looking as if they had suddenly realized something. Many commoner students, in particular, looked up to Chu Yunfan. Chu Yunfan was their role model and ultimate goal. They also heard that he's a commoner student, but it's hard to say. Who knows, he might have received funding from some big financial group. That's also possible. Many of the students responded with an "oh." They thought that they knew the truth, which was also the most likely reason. Chu Yunfan carried his battle saber on his back as he shuttled through the crowd. The surrounding students were all discussing the battle saber on his back. The mighty, 3 million yuan shadowless battle saber was a mythical existence to these students. In fact, Chu Yunfan had only received the shadowless saber yesterday. He had finally received it before the actual combat. It was refined using high-tech combined with primordial adamantine, which was unique to the Kunlun realm. Even the battle saber issued by the Federation government weighed 40 pounds. As for the shadowless battle saber, its sharpness and hardness were far superior to ordinary battle sabers. However, it only weighed 20 pounds. With the same strength, a warrior's combat endurance could be doubled. Entering the class, what greeted his eyes were all kinds of weapons and the faces of slightly excited teenagers. Chu Yunfan looked around. Although there were few people like him who had brought weapons worth millions, almost all of them had changed to better weapons. No one was using the weapons issued by the Federation government. This was actual combat. No one would joke about their own lives. Even a commoner family would do their best to buy a weapon worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Chu Yunfan's parents had also asked him about this, but he had rejected them because he had a solution. Not long after he sat down, he heard Gao Hongji's voice. "Wow, you really bought the Shadowless." Gao Hongji held a long spear in his hand. The body of the spear emitted a metallic glow and the tip of the spear flickered with a sharp light. At this moment, he looked at the battle saber on Chu Yunfan's back and his eyes lit up. He had heard Chu Yunfan say that he wanted to buy the Shadowless saber, but he only thought that Chu Yunfan was just saying it. After all, he was very clear about Chu Yunfan's family background, and Chu Yunfan had also refused his financial support. He should not be able to afford it. It just arrived yesterday. Chu Yunfan said with a smile. Then Gao Hongji frowned and said, "Don't tell me that you have signed a contract to sell yourself to those big companies. Although those big companies are willing to give you money, the work they want you to do is life-threatening. It's not worth 3 million. He knew that many big companies like to sponsor some talented but very poor students so that they would sign a contract to sell themselves. Although the conditions were generous, the things they wanted them to do were also very dangerous. He did not want Chu Yunfan to go down this path. If you really lack money, you can tell me. It's not worth it to exchange your life for it." Chu Yunfan smiled and said, "Don't worry. I'm not stupid. I have other ways to earn money." "Okay." While they were talking, another figure appeared. It was none other than Tang Xiu. Tang Xiu nodded to the two of them. They were both from class 11, so they were definitely much closer to each other than the students. Tang Xiu was holding a long sword. Its style was quite simple and one could not tell the brand, but it was obviously not bad either. However, Chu Yunfan noticed that Tang Xiu's aura had changed again and she had become even stronger. If Chu Yunfan had not been much more sensitive to energy than the average person, he would not have sensed it. It seemed like she had broken through to the third level of the Qi Si stage. She was still one step ahead of Chu Yunfan. However, Chu Yunfan immediately felt relieved. During the class dividing assessment a month ago, Tang Xiu was already at the second level of the Qi Si stage. It was normal for her to make another breakthrough in a month. However, he was still slightly surprised in his heart. Tang Xiu was indeed amazing, no wonder she was able to make the teacher look at her in a different light. Not long after, Yang also entered the classroom. He was dressed in combat gear and held a thick long saber in his hand. He was also walking the path of a heavy saber. The moment he entered, the students could not help but exclaim in surprise. The long saber in his hand also had a great background. Its price was not inferior to the Shadowless saber. It was in fact more than 3 million yuan. The crowd talked for a while. Not long after, the homeroom teacher, Qin Wu, walked in. He glanced around and confirmed that everyone was present, then he said, "Since everyone is here, let's get ready. Let's gather on the field and get ready to set off." Hearing Qin Wu's words, many people clenched their weapons tightly. The real combat was finally coming. Whether it was a dragon or a worm, they would all see it in this battle. Under the leadership of the class monitor, Yang, everyone headed to the field to gather. At this time, the students of the Focus Class 1 had already gathered here. They were originally competing against each other, so they instinctively confronted each other. Among them, Chu Yunfan also met the students of the previous class 11, as well as an old acquaintance, Feng Dang. Chapter 76. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Battle for Class Honor Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The students of the two classes were basically the cream of the crop among the students of the school. They were split into two halves. The school's intention to let them compete with each other and promote each other was obvious. And nobody wanted to fall behind. They were both the cream of the crop among the students. Who would be willing to be inferior to others? Among the ordinary students, there was an obvious core and center, similar to Ouyang's core position in Class 2. That was a youth around the age of 16 or 17. He was different from Ouyang. He was only of medium build, but the aura from his body was not inferior to Ouyang. Clearly, he was also a formidable figure. Chu Yunfan had heard of him before. This was the class monitor of Class 1, Zhang Teng. Just like Ouyang, he was already a prominent figure across the entire school. Basically, he was a rarity in the school. The school had also put in a lot of effort in balancing the strength of the two classes. However, he had also heard of some other things about Zhang Teng. Zhang Teng's reputation was not very good. Although Ouyang was distant, his reputation was generally good. However, in the past, Zhang Teng had relied on his family's connections in the city, forming gangs in the school. Many students had been bullied. Even Chu Yunfan had seen it with his own eyes once. Therefore, he instinctively did not have a good impression of Zhang Teng even though he had never actually interacted with Zhang Teng. Soon, Chu Yunfan felt a fierce gaze. He looked up and saw that it was Feng Daying. Chu Yunfan only smiled slightly, as if he did not take Feng Daying's vicious gaze to heart at all. This made Feng Daying even angrier. When he saw Tang Xiu, Zhang Teng's eyes immediately lit up. His eyes immediately rolled as he said, "Oh Yang, it seems like it's been a long time since we've competed. Why? Haven't you been beaten up enough by me?" Oh Yang said bluntly. He did not have a good impression of Zhang Teng, who was on par with him. A vicious look flashed through Zhang Teng's eyes. Then, he said, "It's boring if we only fight each other every time. The school has divided the elites of the students into two classes and let each of us lead one class. I think you should know the meaning. It's been more than a month now, and we haven't had a good duel yet. Why don't we take advantage of the moment before the teachers arrive? Let's have a competition to see if Class 2 is stronger or Class 1 is. Let's go. Class 1 is definitely stronger than Class 2. Nonsense, what's the use of just talking? Those who say they are stronger than Class 2 can come to talk to my sword." Almost immediately, Zhang Teng's words resonated with many people. These people were all young and had a lot of martial skills. How could they not be competitive? It was just that most of them were usually restricted by the school rules. Yang only considered for a moment before saying, "Sure. If you and I don't take action, the others can take action. Who from Class 2 wants to duel?" At this time, a student from Class 2 stood out and said, "Let me do it." Chu Yunfan looked over. This student was called Wang Lai. He was tall and strong. He had long limbs and looked quite oppressive. "TL fight you." At this time, unexpectedly, Feng Daying raised his hand and stepped down from the stage. Wang Lai's expression became slightly solemn. Feng Daying was already quite famous among the students. As a former class monitor, he was naturally extraordinary. Both sides were in battle stances. In an instant, they exchanged blows. Feng Daying's exquisite steel sword was abnormally sharp and his sword technique was on point. As soon as he started, he launched an astonishing attack. The sword stabbed straight at Wang Lai's vital points. His technique was swift and ruthless. Wang Lai was unwilling to be outdone. The long spear in his hand danced seamlessly and he managed to block all of Feng Daying's attacks. Everyone focused their attention and watched quietly. Both of them had already stepped into the Qi stage. During the exchange of blows, their true Qi tore through the sky over and over. It was extremely intense. However, after watching just 2 moves, Chu Yunfan kept shaking his head. Wang Lai was not a match for him. At most, he would lose in 20 moves. The gap between the two sides was simply all-encompassing. Although Wang Lai had already stepped into the Qi C stage, he was only at the first level of the Qi C stage. On the other hand, Feng Dang had clearly stepped into the peak of the second level of the Qi C stage. Regardless of speed or strength, Feng Dang's true Qi was far above Wang Lai's. However, this secretly surprised Chu Yunfan a little. After Feng Dang lost to him, not only did he not become dispirited, but his strength had also improved rapidly. TSK. As expected, no one should be underestimated. As the crowd cheered, as expected by Chu Yunfan, Wang Lai was defeated. He could only endure until the 19th move. Wang Lai's arm got cut. Fresh blood was dripping from the wound. The students from Class 2 immediately stepped forward and sprayed on some healing spray. Very soon, the wound began to scab. Feng Dang, it's fine if the outcome is decided between the students, but there's no need to make it so bloody. Gao Hongji stepped forward and said. This is nothing. Gao Hongji. What do you think our classes are going to do this time? We are going for actual combat. When we fight with the monsters, it will be 10 times bloodier than this. People will die. Feng Dang could not stop laughing, as if she was mocking Gao Hongji's womanly benevolence. Gao Hongji frowned slightly and said, you understand what I mean. It's fine that you defeated Wang Lai, but you didn't need to cut him to win. We're about to go on the expedition. What are you trying to do? Feng Dang laughed loudly and said, you blame me for his inferiority. Since ancient times, there has never been anyone who blamed the winner. After Feng Dang said that, many people in Class 1 laughed out loud with disdainful looks on their faces, while many students in Class 2 revealed upset and indignant expressions. For the first time, the honor of the class was completely integrated with their personal honor. In fact, this was also the purpose of the school in dividing the classes. It was so that they could create their own motivation to compete. Gao Hongji, why? Do you want to fight too? It just so happens that the problem between us can also be solved. Feng Dang looked at Gao Hongji provocatively and said. If you want to fight, then come. I'm not afraid of you. Gao Hongji sneered and said. Gao Hongji grasped his spear and stepped into the field. He pointed at Feng Dang and said, come. There was a long-standing grudge between the two of them. As the former Big Three of Class 11, they had competed a lot. How could they not be at loggerheads? Then watch carefully. Feng Dang shouted. Then, with his long sword in hand, he took the initiative to attack first. Because he knew that he was a short-ranged attacker, while Gao Hongji had a long-ranged weapon. Once the distance was widened, Gao Hongji would control the situation. This step was both brilliant and ruthless. However, Gao Hongji was not an ordinary person. He immediately reacted and struck out with his spear. Then, the two parties directly collided. Chapter 77. Chu Yunfan's Attack, Terrifying Power. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 77. Chu Yunfan's Attack, Terrifying Power. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Compared to the battle between Feng Dang and Wang Lai, the battle between Feng Dang and Gao Hongji was much more intense. The strength of these two was more evenly matched. Feng Dang had already stepped into the second level of the Qi C stage, and Gao Hongji was also at the second level of the Qi C stage. For a moment, the weapons of the two sides made clanging sounds that rang through the air. The two people did not seem much different in all aspects. Both parties exchanged dozens of moves in a short period of time. Many people held their breath and concentrated, afraid that they would miss out on any detail. The two of them were definitely the elites of two different classes. These two who had chances of getting into a focus university in the future were already different from before. L.RG Feng Daying's sword techniques were sharp and ruthless, but Gao Hongji's spear techniques were unrestrained. They were both good, and each had their advantages. Chu Yunfan looked down. It seemed that both sides were about the same, but he soon realized that something was wrong. At this moment, his eyes were like a scanner, scanning both sides into his mind and then reassembling and recreating their battle. Chu Yunfan relied on this method to absorb battle experience like a sponge. In this regard, even Lu Yushu praised Chu Yunfan's rapid growth in actual combat experience, which was simply astonishing. However, Chu Yunfan realized that the battle between the two sides was different from the battle model that he had constructed in his mind. He instinctively chose to believe the battle model that he had automatically constructed in his mind. That was because he had never made a mistake before. After a few breaths, Chu Yunfan immediately understood what the problem was. Feng Daying was holding back. Sure enough, Chu Yunfan had just figured it out when the victor was decided between the two. Gao Hongji was careless and was pushed back by Feng Daying. He staggered and was about to fall out of the battlefield. However, Feng Daying refused to give up. He thrust his sword directly at Gao Hongji's ribs. A sinister smile appeared on Feng Daying's face. He had been suppressing it all this while. He had been waiting for an opening. Now, his opportunity had finally arrived. He had to vent all the anger he had felt for the past few years in one breath. Damn it! Gao Hongji also realized this. Feng Daying was too cunning. Feng Daying did just want to defeat him, he wanted to severely injure him. When the time came, he would have to pass the buck. Who could blame him? It was true that the school did not allow students to fight in private, but this kind of sparring that both sides were willing to have, as long as no one died and there were no serious consequences, they would usually turn a blind eye. Just as he thought that he would not be able to dodge the incoming strike, he heard a clang, and Feng Daying's sword was blocked. Unknown to him, Chu Yunfan had stepped onto the stage. Chu Yunfan used his shadowless saber, which was now out of its scabbard, to block the strike. At this moment, Gao Hongji had just stabilized himself. Chu Yunfan, you dare to interfere in our battle. Feng Daying saw that his sword had not pierced Gao Hongji's body and immediately roared furiously. Since the battle has already been decided, is there a need to go all out? Chu Yunfan said coldly. You hid your true strength and held back because you wanted to make this strike. At this time, the others reacted one by one. Only then did they know Feng Daying's goal. Even many of the people in class 1 looked at Feng Daying differently. They all had the intention to fight for victory, and in order to win, it was normal to use a reserve tactic. However, they were still schoolmates and were not enemies who would fight to the death. Feng Daying had been reserving his strength not to win, but to heavily injure the other party. This caused many people to feel contempt in their hearts. When he saw the surrounding students looking at him in a different light, Feng Daying immediately became furious. He said, You dare to criticize me when you interrupted our sparring without permission. What do you want me to do on the field? Is this the behavior of all the people in class 2? 2 going against 1. Feng Daying's ridicule also caused many of the students from class 2 to become displeased. Even Yang frowned slightly. Suddenly, Zhang Ting opened his mouth and said, Meddling in a sparring session without permission isn't right. And you want to talk about rules? Yang, do all of your people from class 2 have this kind of behavior? I'm very disappointed in you. Zhang Ting, you have the nerve to talk about rules. Who doesn't know about that little thing of yours? If you have any objections, let's go. Yang said coldly and retorted without any restraint. Zhang Ting's face flushed red and a malicious expression flashed across his face. Since it's a sparring session, I'll be the next one. As for Gao Hongji, I'll admit defeat on his behalf. Feng Daying, do you dare fight me? Chu Yunfan said. He had seen through Feng Daying's plan, but he did not open his mouth to warn Gao Hongji because this was a spar. However, since Gao Hongji had already lost, he could not let Feng Dang seriously injure Gao Hongji. If that strike had struck its target, the healing mist would have been useless. Gao Hongji would probably have had to go to the hospital to recuperate. He would definitely miss this session's actual combat. At that time, the gap between Gao Hongji and the others would probably widen, and this was Feng Dang's goal. A Royal Rumble. Class 2 really is something. Feng Dang sneered and said. A Royal Rumble. Against you. There's no need for that. Just rest and recover your true energy. I won't take advantage of you. Chu Yunfan said, his eyes flashing with anger. After knowing Feng Dang's goal, he could not hold back the anger in his heart. Behind him, Gao Hongji grasped his long spear tightly. He had not expected that he would be defeated by Feng Dang and that he was almost heavily injured and could not participate in the actual combat session. He was really looking forward to the battle. Good. You're still decent. Feng Dang sneered and sat down cross-legged. After a while, he recovered the true energy that he had consumed. Then, he stood up and looked at Chu Yunfan. Feng Dang called out, draw your sword. This time, I'll take back what you owe me, including interest. Draw my sword. Against you. There's no need. Chu Yunfan said coldly. How dare you? Feng Dang could feel the disdain in Chu Yunfan's words. As soon as he finished speaking, he took a step forward and instantly ran toward Chu Yunfan. The flash of light from his sword was like mercury pouring down from the ground, sweeping directly toward Chu Yunfan's neck. 3 moves are enough to deal with you. As soon as Chu Yunfan finished speaking, the saber that was sealed in its scabbard in his hand leaped out. It was not unsheathed, but its speed was fast. Clang! Feng Dang's sword collided with Chu Yunfan's scabbard. Although it was only a scabbard, it was forged from the same material as the blade. Otherwise, it would not be able to seal such a sharp saber. Zah! Feng Dang immediately felt a terrifying and strange force come from the place where the collision happened, affecting his sword. It almost made him drop the sword in his hand. He could not even stabilize his body. He could not help but take a step back to dispel this strange force. How could his strength be so great? Feng Dang felt a storm brewing in his heart. Chapter 78. He said 3 moves, and he did it in 3 moves. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 78. He said 3 moves, and he did it in 3 moves. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. It was only the first time they were exchanging blows, but Feng Dang already felt a strange force shaking him so much that he could barely hold on to his sword. Although he had exchanged blows with Chu Yunfan previously, at that time, Chu Yunfan was only at the beginning stages of his cultivation. He had been far from terrifying, and it had only been a little over a month since then. First move. Chu Yunfan uttered these 2 words with an expressionless face. Feng Dang was in a state of shock, but when he heard these words, he could not help but feel furious. He was, after all, an elite in his class, even throughout the school. His and Chu Yunfan's cultivation level was at the same level at most. Now, Chu Yunfan wanted to defeat him in 3 moves. This was simply going too far. Feng Dang shouted and immediately steadied his body. Then, the sword in his hand struck out with an astonishing amount of true energy. An expert in the Si-Chi stage could place his true energy on their weapon, greatly increasing the weapon's offensive power. It could also make the person's speed faster and strength stronger. However, Chu Yunfan remained expressionless. He had already activated his true energy. The scabbard suddenly swung down, cutting Feng Dang's true energy into nothingness. Although Feng Dang's true energy was quite powerful, it was still unable to damage the scabbard that was mixed with primordial adamantine. Clang! The scabbard ruthlessly smashed onto Feng Dang's sword. Whir! Another metallic hum sounded, and the terrifying power once again spread out. Feng Daying's arm began to tremble violently and he took several steps back. Everyone present saw this scene. Many of them felt as if they had breathed in a lung full of cold air. 2 moves, and each time, Feng Daying was the first to attack. Theoretically, he should have the upper hand. However, Chu Yunfan was not in a hurry. He held his saber which was still within its scabbard in one hand and counterattacked, suppressing Feng Daying. Nobody here was stupid. They could see who was stronger and who was weaker. However, they did not believe what Chu Yunfan said. He said that he could defeat Feng Daying in 3 moves. This was already 2 moves. What great strength! Zhang Ting said as a look of surprise flashed through his eyes. Tang Xiu looked at Chu Yunfan with a strange light in her eyes, but this was rather normal. Ever since she started to notice this classmate, Chu Yunfan had displayed all kinds of skills more than once. This was just one of them. Second move. Chu Yunfan spat out these 2 words again. Feng Daying grew even more furious. Chu Yunfan had gone too far. At that time, he felt that his entire arm was going numb. It was a shock. Just how much strength did Chu Yunfan have? At this moment, Chu Yunfan, who had been passively receiving attacks, finally made his first move. The first strike was one of the moves of the earth-splitting saber technique. The strike slashed down like a mountain. The scabbard came down toward Feng Daying's face like a bolt of lightning. Feng Daying turned pale with fright. He did not have time to put up any defense and hurriedly raised his sword to block. Clang! There was another loud sound of metal clashing. The sword in Feng Daying's hand instantly flew away. Feng Daying could not hold on to his sword. The palm of his hand that was holding the sword was split open, and blood dripped down. His entire arm was completely numb from the shock. Meanwhile, Chu Yunfan's scabbard was like a hot knife cutting through butter. Its momentum did not decrease, and it fiercely landed on Feng Daying's chest. Bam! Feng Daying let out a blood-curdling scream as his entire body flew back more than 3 meters before landing heavily on the ground. His body curled up like a lobster as he rolled on the ground in pain. At this moment, everyone realized that a bloody scar had appeared on Feng Daying's chest. Because even his martial arts uniform had been slashed open by the scabbard. A huge bloody scar could be seen. When many people saw this scene, they could only gasp. Although this strike had only been from a scabbard, if it landed on their body, one could imagine how painful it would be. As they looked at Chu Yunfan again, they could not help but look at him in a different light. This attack was really ruthless. What shocked everyone more was Chu Yunfan's strength. Feng Daying was an elite of a focus class. From the fact that he had defeated 2 students of class 2 in a row, it was clear that Feng Daying's strength was indeed extraordinary. But even such a person was defeated by Chu Yunfan in 3 moves. He said 3 moves, and he did it in 3 moves. From the beginning to the end, Feng Daying was completely crushed. He could not even retaliate. He's so powerful. He only used 3 moves. What's even more terrifying is his strength. His saber technique was not subtle. Its terrifying strength was fully displayed. This is what we often say about having extraordinary talent. The people of the past would always choose those who had extraordinary talent in cultivation. People like us would have to practice our asses off every day, and we would still be unable to match the innate strength of others. A moment later, many of the students in class 1 reacted one after another. They hurriedly lifted Feng Daying to the side and sprayed him with a healing spray. Only then did he feel a little better. He was no longer in so much pain that he was rolling on the ground. Although Chu Yunfan had used only a scabbard, the width and spread of the bloodstains showed how much pain he was in. Meanwhile, the students in class 2 cheered one after another. Previously, they felt extremely aggrieved after having two people defeated in a row by Feng Dang. Now that Chu Yunfan had defeated Feng Dang cleanly and easily, it also helped them vent their anger. They could not help but look at Class 1 and be pleased with themselves. Well done. You helped me vent my anger. Gao Hongji gave a thumbs up. The upset feeling from being defeated by Feng Dang just now had been swept away. How was that, Zhang Teng? Oh Yang raised his eyebrows and said. What do you mean, how was that? You've only won 1 out of 3 rounds. Zhang Teng immediately retorted, unwilling to be outdone. In terms of overall victory, our Class 1 is still stronger. Hearing this, Chu Yunfan glanced at Class 1 and said, we just won 1 round. I represented Class 2 in that fight. Who from Class 1 will come forward to teach us? Immediately, Chu Yunfan's words frightened more than half of the students in Class 1. Feng Dang's miserable state just now had already rung a warning bell for them. The person in front of them was not an ordinary person. Chu Yunfan swept a glance at the students and then said, why? Does no one dare to come forward? The students in Class 1 seemed to be able to see a hint of ridicule on Chu Yunfan's calm face. He mocked that they did not have the courage to accept the challenge. Meanwhile, Zhang Ting's face was as dark as the night sky. Chu Yunfan was clearly stepping all over them. If he had not told Yang that both of them would hold back and were not going to step forward, he would have immediately gone up to teach this guy a lesson. Finally, one of the students in Class 1 who felt that he had been belittled finally could not help but jump out. TL fight you. This was a youth with a medium build. His face was somewhat rough. He was holding a huge mace in his hand and looked extremely mighty. His gaze when he looked at Chu Yunfan was filled with unruliness and provocation. Chapter 79. What kind of strange strength was this? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 79. What kind of strange strength was this? Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Yunfan, be careful. That's Li Guohao from Class 1. He's very strong. Be careful. Gao Hongji reminded Chu Yunfan from behind. Chu Yunfan was not paying much attention to these people because they were too ordinary. These people's levels were very far from his. But Gao Hongji was different. These people were all his future competitors, especially for the limited number of places in focus universities. Their standards were about the same, so they were definitely competitors, so they would all have to pay attention. Li Guohao was one such character. He was a famous figure in the school. When Li Guohao heard Gao Hongji's words, he only raised his eyebrows and then looked at Chu Yunfan provocatively. Chu Yunfan, on the other hand, looked at Li Guochao with some interest. Outsiders thought that he was talented, but in fact, he was not. Because Chu Yunfan cultivated the mighty Eternal Emperor method, his physical fitness could be said to be several times that of someone in the same realm. That was why he gave people the impression that he was gifted. If one's boundless strength was created after birth, then Li Guohao was innate boundless strength. It was also the kind that ordinary people envied the most. The physical fitness that others had painstakingly cultivated, as long as they grew up normally, they would be able to have it. Chu Yunfan understood the meaning in Li Guohao's eyes. It was probably because Li Guohao felt that Chu Yunfan was also gifted and had boundless strength that he wanted to challenge Chu Yunfan. Chu Yunfan looked at Li Guohao. The mace in his hand looked extremely heavy. Most weapons were extremely light. Otherwise, it would consume too much of the user's physical strength. However, a mace was the complete opposite. They walked the path of great strength. It was suitable for those with extraordinary talent who were able to completely unleash their strength. Li Guohao slammed the ground with his mace. Immediately, a loud collision sound was heard. Everyone jumped. They could not help but be shocked. What great strength! Previously, Chu Yunfan had also displayed great strength, but it was far from being as direct as Li Guihao. You rest first. I won't take advantage of you. Li Guihao looked at Chu Yunfan provocatively and said. His voice was somewhat rough. No need. It won't take much physical strength to deal with you. Chu Yunfan said bluntly. On the other hand, Feng Dang was so angry that his jaw was sore. Chu Yunfan was clearly looking down on Li Guihao. However, as a loser, he had no choice but to pray in his heart that Li Guihao would teach Chu Yunfan a harsh lesson. Good, this is interesting. Receive my strike then. Li Guihao roared and launched an attack. He waved the mace in his hand like a tiger. Then, he smashed it down toward Chu Yunfan at lightning speed. Many students cried out in surprise. Usually, when they encountered such a strong type, they could only dodge and not face the opponent head-on. However, Chu Yunfan clearly did not think so. He did not even dodge. He held his saber in one hand and still did not unsheath it. Instead, he used the scabbard to meet the attack. You're courting death. You dare accept my strike with only one hand. When the time comes, don't blame me if your arm is broken. Li Guihao thought to himself. It was as if he could already see his victory and Chu Yunfan's face when his arm broke. Clang! Just as everyone expected, another shocking collision occurred. However, it was completely different from what everyone had expected. Everyone's initial thoughts were similar to Li Guihao's. Although Chu Yunfan seemed to be very strong, he was holding a saber in one hand against Li Guihao who held a mace in both hands. Even if his arm was not broken by the huge force, he would still be at a great disadvantage. However, the truth was that Chu Yunfan raised his scabbard to block the mace's strike. Although everyone could not feel it, they could guess it from the loud collision. Chu Yunfan's figure was as steady as a mountain, like an old tree rooted to the ground. He did not retreat nor did his arm falter. What? How is this possible? Li Guihao's eyes widened. He had smashed down his mace with full strength, but not only did it not break Chu Yunfan's arm, but it did not even make Chu Yunfan move. In the next moment, Li Guihao felt a terrifying force coming from the other end of his mace, almost making him lose his grip on his weapon. The effects of force were mutual. He had always been one to bully others with his strength. Now that he had encountered someone with the same strength, he was completely unprepared and almost suffered a small loss. Interesting. Chu Yunfan looked at Li Guihao and said with a smile. Chu Yunfan could feel that his own physical fitness was very strong, but there he did not know how strong it was. Now that there was such a person he could test on, it was a good time to give it a try. I took your strike. Now you take mine. Chu Yunfan shouted loudly, and then his saber swung down. Interesting. Li Guihao suddenly felt that he had been underestimated. Then, he waved the mace in his hand and directly smashed it against the scabbard. Although he had suffered a little loss just now, he felt that it was purely due to his carelessness. He did not think he was no match for Chu Yunfan. Clang! Another shocking collision. The entire field was filled with this shocking collision. When the other students saw this collision, they felt a little powerless. If they closed their eyes, it would sound like two monsters were colliding. At the same time, they were envious. The body was the foundation of all martial arts. The better one's physical fitness was, the further one would go in the future. Everyone understood this principle, which was why they were even more envious of such talented people. Another collision. The scene seemed to be a draw, but everyone could see that Li Guihao was using both hands and a powerful weapon like the mace, while Chu Yunfan only used one hand, and the saber he used was not very heavy. The difference was very obvious. However, it was clear that the two people in the arena did not care about what the others were thinking, especially Li Guihao. While he was shocked by Chu Yunfan's terrifying strange strength, he did not have the time to think too much about it. Chu Yunfan did not seem to need any rest as he slashed down with his scabbard again. Clang! 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 They clashed again and again. There were not any fancy techniques, and both sides were using pure strength to defeat the other, especially Li Guihao. This was his specialty. At this moment, Chu Yunfan's desire to win was also aroused. He gave up on the gorgeous saber moves and used pure strength to meet Li Guihao's blows. Although this kind of battle style did not have any gorgeous and dazzling moves, it was the most exciting to watch. After the two sides exchanged 10 moves in a row, there was a clanging sound, and the mace fell to the ground. Li Guihao's thumb and forefinger were bleeding, and his arms were trembling slightly. He could not hold his weapon any longer. Victory and defeat had been decided. Everyone looked at Chu Yunfan in shock. What kind of strange strength was this? Chapter 80. Who else dares step forward? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 80. Who else dares step forward? Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The outcome of this battle was clear to everyone. This was a battle of pure strength, and it was obvious that Chu Yunfan had won. Moreover, he had won by a huge margin. Chu Yunfan had only used one hand against Li Guihao until both his arms trembled, his thumb and palm split open, and even the mace he was proud clattered to the ground. Lost. Li Guihao could not help but open his mouth and say with a bitter smile. He thought that in terms of absolute strength, no one could compare to him. However, today, all his pride had single-handedly been knocked down by Chu Yunfan. There was a stronger hand than the strong. At the same time, today's battle had also allowed him to understand his own shortcomings. The strength that he was so proud of before was said to be undefeatable. Even if the class monitor, Zhang Teng, fought with him, even Zhang Teng would not be able to face him head-on. This had also made him overly confident. Finally, after meeting Chu Yunfan, who had completely crushed him in terms of strength, he had to admit defeat. If he had made some achievements in martial arts, he would not have been so passive. At least, he would have had other options when he did not have an advantage in strength. Of course, he did not know that even if he used his mace, he would not be a match for Chu Yunfan. Because in terms of martial arts, Chu Yunfan had a greater advantage. Who else dares step forward? Chu Yunfan branded the shadowless saber that was sealed in its sheath and said. As far as he could see, the students of Class 1 did not even dare to look at him. They were completely scared out of their wits. Whether it was Feng Dang or Li Guihao, they were already the best of the best in the entire class. Other than the class monitor, Zhang Teng, who would dare to say that they could definitely beat them. They would have been sitting ducks. At this moment, Chu Yunfan was like a god of war. He's going too far, said Zhang Teng when he saw this scene. His face was livid. Chu Yunfan was ruthlessly slapping him in the face. Previously, he had gleefully challenged the experts from both classes to a duel with Ouyang. Now, Chu Yunfan was fighting alone and no one dared to respond. He instantly felt that Chu Yunfan was going too far. Zhang Teng immediately stood up and was about to personally enter the field. He did not care about any **T rules. However, at that moment, the sound of footsteps was heard. Soon after, 3 figures appeared on the field one after another. They all looked tall and strong. One of them was the homeroom teacher of Class 2, Qin Wu. Beside him was a man who was about the same height as him but had a full beard. That was the homeroom teacher of Class 1, Jin Feng. Seeing these 2 people, all the students began to feel nervous. Although the school usually turned a blind eye to their private fights, they still felt like they had been caught red-handed. Behind these 2 people was a tall man dressed in a military camouflage uniform. He looked to be about in his late 20s and had a majestic aura. He walked over with large strides, like a tiger. He possessed the aura of a tiger. What are you doing? Qin Wu shouted as he took a step forward and looked at the crowd, especially the few people who were injured. Jin Feng also took a step forward. His brows were deeply furrowed. From the looks of the situation, it was obvious that these hot-blooded youths had been fighting. What made him feel even more displeased was that from the looks of the situation, Class 2 had 1 injured while their class had 2 injured. They were clearly at a disadvantage. This made him secretly angry. He and Qin Wu were both retired instructors of the army. This time, they were arranged to be the homeroom teachers of Class 1 and Class 2 respectively. It was a competition in itself. The comparison between the two classes was actually a comparison between the two of them. Now that their Class 1 had lost, and after he listened to the development of this matter, he was even more furious. It was fine if they had lost, but his class had even been forced by the other party to act like cowardly turtles, not daring to stand out. He glanced at Chu Yunfan. This student was unfamiliar. He had not noticed Chu Yunfan before, but he had suddenly appeared. Qin Wu was clearly in a much better mood. Sparring between students was very common, but Chu Yunfan had gained a complete victory, so he was naturally in a very good mood. However, he could not show it on his face. However, he was surprised in his heart. The first time he had noticed Chu Yunfan was 2 months ago. At that time, Chu Yunfan had only made an initial appearance and displayed an astonishing talent in martial arts, however, that was all. He had not expected that in just 2 months, Chu Yunfan would be able to single-handedly defeat 2 Class 1 experts. He had forced Class 1 to the point that no one dares to come out and accept the challenge. Although the average class monitor, Zhang Teng, did not enter the fight, Chu Yunfan's results were already shocking enough. On the other hand, the young soldier only had a slight smile on his face. He was not surprised at all. No matter how brave and fierce these students were, could they compare to the people in their army? In his eyes, if they were not killed, then they were just children playing house. Interesting, all of you are very energetic. It seems that you should all have the strength to fight the monsters later. At this moment, everyone's gaze focused on this young soldier. That young soldier did not have stage fright, instead, he opened his mouth and said, "Hello, everyone. This is the first time we're meeting. Let me introduce myself. My name is Xue Bailong. I am currently on active duty in the military region of Donghua City. My military rank is Lieutenant Colonel. Today, I'll be in charge of your school's combat session." Many students cried out in surprise, especially those who paid attention to the military. They all knew that it was not easy for one in the Federation Army to be promoted. From the looks of it, this young soldier was only slightly older than them, yet he was already a lieutenant colonel. Generally speaking, for someone of his age to be able to leave the ranks of a sergeant and become a second lieutenant was already considered pretty good. A person who was already in a high position at such a young age was either capable or had a powerful background. Otherwise, it would be a combination of both. Chu Yunfan's gaze was fixed on Xue Bailong. His intuition told him that this Xue Bailong was extremely dangerous and terrifying, even surpassing his homeroom teacher, Qin Wu. He was the most terrifying person he had ever met. Ever since the Godhead had appeared in Chu Yunfan's mind, his intuition in this aspect had never been wrong. No matter how well the other party tried to hide it, it could not be hidden from him. "We'll see that you guys are still in the mood to spar before the combat. That's pretty good. Very energetic. When you guys fight the monsters later, you guys will have plenty of time to vent your excess energy," Xue Bailong said. "However, you guys don't have to worry. Our Federation Army will do the most dangerous job. You guys shouldn't encounter any monsters that are too powerful." "But sir, if we encounter a powerful monster, what should we do?" "Fight to the death." A student suddenly raised his hand and asked. "Then you should keep your eyes wide open and stare at it. This way, you will die with more dignity," Xue Bailong said with a straight face, but it caused a burst of laughter from the students.